7-year-old Melissa Parker was the crown jewel of the Southern Child Beauty Pageant circuit in 1994, with her blonde ringlets, sparkling blue eyes, and a smile that could light up any stage. Living in the small town of Magnolia Springs, Alabama, Melissa had already won 12 pageant titles by the time she disappeared, including Little Miss Alabama Princess and Tiny Miss Southern Belle. Her mother, Patricia Parker, was a former beauty queen herself who had invested everything into her daughter's pageant career, driving hundreds of miles every weekend to competitions across the Southeast. Melissa's father, Robert Parker, worked as a mechanic at the local Ford dealership and had mixed feelings about his daughter's pageant involvement. While he loved seeing Melissa happy and confident on stage, he worried about the financial strain the competitions placed on their family and the pressure it put on his young daughter. The family's modest 2-bedroom house was filled with trophies, crowns, and elaborate pageant dresses that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. On the evening of October 15, 1994, the Parker family attended the annual Harvest Moon Beauty Pageant in Montgomery, Alabama, where Melissa was competing for the title of Little Miss Harvest Moon. She had been preparing for this particular competition for months, learning a special dance routine and practicing her interview skills. Patricia had even commissioned a custom-made dress that sparkled with hundreds of sequins and cost nearly $2,000. Money the family could barely afford, but Patricia insisted was necessary for Melissa to remain competitive. The pageant went exactly as expected, with Melissa delivering a flawless performance in the talent portion and charming the judges during the interview segment. When her name was announced as the winner, the 7-year-old beamed with pride as the crown was placed on her head and she took her victory walk down the runway. After the competition, the family celebrated with dinner at a nearby restaurant, where Melissa chatted excitedly about her win and her plans for the upcoming state championship. The drive home to Magnolia Springs took approximately 2 hours, and Melissa dozed in the back seat still wearing her crown and pageant dress. When they arrived at their house around 11:30 p.m., Robert carried his sleeping daughter inside and Patricia helped her change into her pajamas before tucking her into bed. The family's routine was always the same after pageant competitions. They would unpack Melissa's things, carefully hang up her dress, and place her new trophy or crown on the shelf with her other awards. The next morning, Saturday, October 16th, Patricia went to wake Melissa up around 9 a.m. so they could start preparing for the day. They had planned to take Melissa's victory photos at a local park and then spend the afternoon shopping for a new dress for an upcoming competition. When Patricia opened Melissa's bedroom door, she found the bed empty and the window wide open, with the screen pushed outward as if someone had exited through it. Patricia's screams brought Robert running from the kitchen, and within minutes the couple was frantically searching their property and calling Melissa's name. The child's bedroom showed no signs of struggle, and all of her belongings appeared to be in place except for the pajamas she had been wearing the night before. Her pageant dress was still hanging in the closet, and her new crown sat on the knitstand, exactly where Patricia had placed it the previous evening. The Magnolia Springs Police Department was called immediately, and Chief Tom Bradley arrived at the Parker house within 15 minutes of receiving the call. Bradley had known the Parker family for years and was familiar with Melissa from her pageant activities, as her victories were often featured in the local newspaper. The initial investigation focused on the possibility that Melissa had wandered off on her own, perhaps disoriented after waking up in an unfamiliar emotional state following her pageant win. A comprehensive search of the surrounding area began immediately, with police officers, volunteer firefighters, and community members combing through the wooded areas near the Parker home. Bloodhounds were brought in to track Melissa's scent, and the dogs were able to follow a trail from her bedroom window to the edge of the family's property. where it mysteriously disappeared at the road. This evidence suggested that Melissa had either gotten into a vehicle or her scent had been deliberately obscured. As the search entered its second day, the investigation expanded to include interviews with neighbors, family, friends, and anyone who had been at the pageant the previous evening. Investigators were particularly interested in talking to other pageant families, judges, and photographers who had been present at the competition. The pageant world was a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone else, and investigators hoped that someone might have noticed something unusual or suspicious. The case quickly attracted media attention, with local television stations and newspapers covering the story extensively. Melissa's photograph, showing her in one of her pageant gowns with her blonde curls and bright smile, became a familiar image throughout Alabama and the surrounding states. The story resonated with people across the region, partly because of Melissa's young age and partly because of the mysterious circumstances of her disappearance. Patricia Parker became the public face of the search effort, appearing on television interviews and organizing volunteer search parties. She was convinced that someone had taken her daughter and refused to consider the possibility that Melissa might have wandered off on her own. Patricia's background in pageants had given her confidence in front of cameras, and she used this skill to keep Melissa's story in the public eye, hoping that media attention would generate leads that could help find her daughter. The investigation revealed some troubling aspects of the child pageant world that investigators hadn't previously considered. Several parents and pageant officials mentioned receiving strange phone calls and letters from men who seemed overly interested in the young contestants. There were reports of unknown individuals taking unauthorized photographs at competitions and of men who attended pageants despite having no connection to any of the participants. One particularly concerning lead emerged when investigators learned about a man named Harold Brennan, who had been banned from several pageant competitions for inappropriate behavior around the children. Brennan was a photographer who claimed to be creating a book about child beauty pageants, but several parents had complained about his conduct and his request to photograph their daughters in private settings. When investigators tracked down Brennan, they discovered he had left Alabama the day after Melissa's disappearance. The search for Harold Brennan became a multi-state investigation, with law enforcement agencies in Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee coordinating their efforts. When Brennan was finally located in a small town outside Atlanta, he was questioned extensively about his whereabouts on the night of Melissa's disappearance. However, he had an alibi that checked out, and there was no physical evidence connecting him to the case. Despite investigators' suspicions, they were forced to release him after 48 hours. As weeks turned into months, the case began to grow cold despite the continued efforts of investigators and volunteers. The FBI had been called in to assist with the investigation, and agents had interviewed hundreds of people and followed up on dozens of leads. They had examined the possibility that Melissa had been taken by someone involved in child trafficking, but there was no evidence to support this theory. The first anniversary of Melissa's disappearance was marked by a large memorial service held at the local Methodist church, where hundreds of community members gathered to pray for her safe return. Patricia and Robert Parker spoke about their continued hope that their daughter would be found, and they announced a substantial reward for any information leading to Melissa's recovery. The reward money had been donated by other pageant families and local businesses who wanted to help find the missing child. By 1996, 2 years after Melissa's disappearance, the active investigation had been scaled back significantly. The case remained open, and investigators continued to follow up on occasional tips and leads, but the trail had gone completely cold. Patricia Parker had started a foundation to help other families of missing children, while Robert had thrown himself into his work at the dealership, trying to cope with the loss of his daughter. The Parkers' marriage had been severely strained by Melissa's disappearance and the stress of the investigation. Patricia blamed herself for getting Melissa involved in pageants, believing that her daughter's visibility in the pageant world had made her a target. Robert struggled with guilt over not having been more protective of his family and not having insisted on better security measures at their home. In the summer of 1997, almost 3 years after Melissa's disappearance, Patricia decided to clean out the attic of their house as part of preparing to sell the property and move to a different town. The memories associated with their home had become too painful, and both Patricia and Robert felt they needed a fresh start somewhere else. As Patricia sorted through boxes of old belongings, holiday decorations, and stored furniture, she came across items that had belonged to her mother, who had passed away several years earlier. Among her mother's belongings was a cardboard box containing various kitchen items, including an old ceramic cereal bowl with a distinctive floral pattern that Patricia remembered from her childhood. As she lifted the bowl to examine it more closely, she noticed that it felt heavier than it should have, and she could hear something rattling inside. When she turned the bowl over, she discovered that the bottom had been carefully removed and then glued back in place, creating a hidden compartment. Inside the secret compartment, Patricia found a collection of items that made her blood run cold. There were several photographs of Melissa taken at various pageant competitions, but these weren't the usual professional photos or family snapshots. These pictures had been taken from a distance, showing Melissa unaware that she was being photographed. There were also detailed notes about Melissa's pageant schedule, including dates, times, and locations of competitions, written in handwriting that Patricia didn't recognize. Most disturbing of all, Patricia found a key that she immediately recognized as belonging to the spare key holder that her family had hidden under a fake rock in their front yard. The key holder had been empty when police searched the property after Melissa's disappearance, and investigators had assumed that the key had simply been lost or misplaced over time. The discovery of the key in the hidden compartment of her mother's cereal bowl suggested that whoever had taken Melissa had been planning the abduction for some time. Patricia immediately contacted the police, and Chief Bradley arrived at the house within minutes of receiving her call. The contents of the cereal bowl were carefully photographed and collected as evidence, and the bowl itself was sent to the state crime lab for fingerprint analysis. The discovery represented the first significant break in the case since Melissa's disappearance nearly 3 years earlier. The investigation into the cereal bowl discovery revealed a shocking truth that no one in the Parker family had suspected. The handwriting on the notes was eventually matched to samples taken from Patricia's deceased mother, Evelyn Morrison, who had died of cancer 6 months before Melissa's disappearance. This revelation was devastating for Patricia, who had to confront the possibility that her own mother had been involved in her granddaughter's abduction. Further investigation revealed that Evelyn Morrison had been struggling with severe mental health issues in the months before her death, including paranoid delusions and increasingly erratic behavior. Family members later recalled that Evelyn had become obsessed with the idea that Melissa was in danger from strangers at pageant competitions and had expressed concerns about protecting her granddaughter from what she perceived as threats. Breakthrough came when investigators discovered that Evelyn Morrison had been corresponding with her brother, Frank Morrison, who lived in rural Mississippi and had a history of mental illness and criminal behavior. Phone records revealed that Evelyn had been in frequent contact with Frank in the weeks leading up to Melissa's disappearance, and bank records showed that she had sent him several large sums of money during this same period. When investigators traveled to Mississippi to question Frank Morrison, they found him living in a remote cabin on family property that had been in the Morrison family for generations. Morrison initially denied any involvement in Melissa's disappearance, but when confronted with the evidence from the cereal bowl and his sister's notes, He eventually broke down and confessed to his role in the abduction. According to Morrison's confession, his sister Evelyn had convinced him that Melissa was being exploited and abused through her participation in beauty pageants, and that the only way to save her was to remove her from that environment permanently. Evelyn had given Morrison detailed information about the family's routines and had provided him with the spare house key so he could enter the home and take Melissa while she was sleeping. Morrison led investigators to a location deep in the Mississippi woods where he had buried Melissa's remains shortly after taking her from her bedroom that October night in 1994. The 7-year-old had died from exposure and dehydration after Morrison had kept her hidden in an abandoned hunting cabin for several days. Not knowing how to care for a child and too mentally unstable to make rational decisions about what to do next, the discovery of Melissa's remains brought a mixture of relief and renewed grief to Patricia and Robert Parker. While they finally had answers about what had happened to their daughter, they also had to process the shocking revelation that Patricia's own mother had orchestrated the abduction that led to Melissa's death. The knowledge that someone they had trusted completely had betrayed them in such a devastating way added another layer of trauma to their already unbearable loss. Frank Morrison was arrested and charged with kidnapping and murder, though his severe mental illness raised questions about his competency to stand trial. During the legal proceedings, it became clear that both Morrison and his sister Evelyn had been suffering from the same hereditary mental condition that had gone undiagnosed and untreated for years. Patricia had to confront the possibility that she might have inherited the same genetic predisposition to mental illness. The case highlighted disturbing questions about the child beauty pageant industry and the potential risks faced by young participants. While investigators found no evidence that Melissa had been specifically targeted by predators within the pageant community, the case drew attention to the need for better security measures and background checks for people who had access to child contestants. Patricia Parker eventually testified before a state legislative committee about the need for stricter regulations of child beauty pageants, including requirements for security personnel at competitions and mandatory background checks for photographers and other adults who worked with the contestants. Her advocacy efforts led to the passage of several laws designed to better protect children involved in pageant competitions. The resolution of Melissa's case also brought closure to the many investigators, volunteers, and community members who had worked tirelessly to find her. The discovery of the truth in such an unexpected place, hidden in an old cereal bowl in an attic, served as a reminder that answers to even the most complex mysteries can sometimes be found in the most unlikely locations. For Patricia and Robert Parker, learning the truth about Melissa's disappearance marked the beginning of a long healing process. They established a memorial scholarship in Melissa's name to help other children pursue their dreams in safer environments, and they became advocates for missing children and families affected by mental illness. While they could never bring back their daughter, they found purpose in working to prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. The case of Melissa Parker remains a cautionary tale about the importance of recognizing and treating mental illness, the need for vigilance in protecting children from exploitation, and the devastating consequences that can result when family members harbor dangerous delusions about protecting loved ones. The little girl who had brought so much joy to the pageant world with her bright smile and sparkling personality became a symbol of innocence lost and the need for society to do better in protecting its most vulnerable members.